Hi, everyone. Welcome to She Shares. It's great to have you all here. I'm Donna Lucas, and I'm so happy to welcome you to the 6th season of She Shares. I can't believe it's been 6 years, and every single program has been fantastic, as we see today with the room completely filled. Before we get to the main event, I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsors, because without them, we wouldn't be able to do these programs and also do our mentorship programs. Our founding sponsors, of course, Lucas Public Affairs, Thomas Law Group, and Karen Skelton, Skelton Strategies. I'd also like to thank our new sponsors for the 2017 season, JP Morgan Chase, Harbridge Consulting, is Hillary here? We'll give her a big applause. BBC Public Affairs, BMW North America, and Brownstein, Hyatt, Farber, and Schreck LLP. How about a big round of applause for our new sponsors for 17? And a big thank you for our very loyal sponsors who have been with us from the very, very beginning. Kaiser, AT&T, the California Endowment, yay, AT&T, the California Endowment, Marcy Freeman, State Farm, Neiman Pappas and Associates, Sacramento Advocates, and Political Solutions. Big round of applause. And thank you to our media sponsors, KCRA, the California Channel, and Comstock Magazine. And as many of you know, She Shares is also a mentorship program. We pair young women with professional Sacramento women at the top of their careers for a year-long mentorship experience. This year, there are 17 pairs in the program. And can you stand up if you are part of the mentorship program, either as a mentee or a mentor? Thank you for being here. Great job. We want to hear how that's going. She Shares Mentorship is produced in partnership with our fiscal agent and nonprofit partner, the California Center for Civic Participation. So thank you to them for helping us with getting that program going. And thank you all for participating. And you can see a list of our mentees and mentors on the sign in the back of the room. If you're interested in the program, please talk to Michelle Clark, or you can mention it to me. So with no further ado, I'm really excited. This is going to be a great program. Thank you both for being here, Mona and Diane. And thank you, Karen Bresla, always for providing a great conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Donna. All right. Can everybody hear me okay? No.
You have to move your mic up. You gotta move your mic up.
How about now? Is that better? Okay. That'll teach me to wear a sweater. All right. Donna, thank you so much, and welcome to our special how-to edition of She Shares. We thought it would be fun to mix up the format a little bit, and we're fortunate enough to have two incredibly accomplished guests who can talk about the perks and perils of serving on a board, whether that board is corporate, nonprofit, or in the public sector. Let me just start by introducing our guests. Mona Pasquil is Appointment Secretary to Governor Jerry Brown, which does not mean that she schedules the governor's appointments.
That's right.
So that would be fine too, but rather she recruits and fills thousands of positions on the state's many boards and commissions. So if you want that blue ribbon panel, Mona is your woman. Diane Miller is president and CEO of Wilcox, Miller & Nelson, a human capital and board governance firm that specializes in executive search, governance consulting, and workforce planning. Did I get that right?
You did.
Okay,
nice
good.
job.
Diane has served on a number of boards, both in the for-profit and the nonprofit worlds. She also co-founded the Women's CEO Group, which brings together Northern California CEOs and business leaders. And little known but true, I read that you were trained as a ballet dancer, which means she can pirouette out of the mountains of resumes that come flying her way from time to time. So Diane, let me just start, not on that note, but on another note. What does it take to serve on the kinds of boards that you search for on behalf of your clients? What are you looking for?
So, well, thanks, Karen, and hi, Mona, and good afternoon, everybody. I think, as a good consultant, my answer would be it depends.
Right.
And it depends upon what type of board. So there are nonprofit boards, there are for-profit boards, there are public, there are private. If we're talking a corporate board, a publicly traded company, that does have particular areas that you need to cover. And certainly, I think we all know that the old school description is that somebody had to be a sitting CEO of a public company. That, I hope, is not my phone. Sitting CEO of a public company. That's really not true anymore, but you still hear it discussed. So what you're starting to see, and I want to also do a shout out to Ann Sheehan, who is here from CalSTRS, and Ann Simpson from CalPERS, of getting the discussion going that there are a lot of qualified individuals out there who may not be sitting CEOs of a public company, who have executive skill sets. So you need to have an executive skill set, and you need to have, for the public company boards, some type of board experience. And generally that comes from the nonprofit world.
So you transition from a nonprofit world where the barrier to entry is maybe not so high, and you move into the corporate world.
I think that is a very traditional way. It's certainly the way I did it. I think everybody I know who serves on a public company board, that's the way they did it. But it also gives you an opportunity to see, is this the kind of work I like to do? Because if you are on a public company board, you're going to be spending a minimum of 250 hours a year working for this company. And when things are going wrong, it's closer to 400. So it's a huge commitment, and the way to figure out if it's for you and to also help you get some training is to start on the smaller nonprofit boards.
Now, Mona, I know the state has how many boards and commissions?
Just a bit over 300.
300, and those range from the well-known Public Utilities Commission to the California Board of Barbering, right?
Barbering and cosmetology.
Barbering and cosmetology, let me get it right. So at any given time, I read there are 12,000 applications in the system.
Plus.
Plus,
Yep.
12,000 plus. So what are you looking for? And again, I'm sure it depends, but maybe you can explain a little bit about how people can get on a public board or commission.
Sure. So it really depends on the board. Many of the boards, if they're consumer boards, they require, a specific background, a licensee, or in many cases, a public slot. We take a very different view when we're looking for people to serve on boards. We look for people who are interested in serving, have a different perspective, and I think for us, the governor has said many times, find whose voice has been missing. So when I got there 6 years ago, we found boards that didn't have a woman or a person of color appointed to it since the late 70s. And so we went out and we asked the team, why? And they said, well, because there's nobody. And I said, well, you can't tell this oldest of 5 that there's no one, because there is. You just have to find them. Right. And so one of the things that we do is the team goes out and meets with, we work with people like Alice Huffman in the NAACP. We work with a lot of different groups to kind of demystify the process and let people know how they might want to serve. Could be education, could be environment, could be anything.
Okay. So before somebody decides they're going to serve on a board or commission, what are the questions they should ask themselves? What do you need to know about your own tolerance and interests before you start? But Diane, why don't you start first?
Sure. So for a public company board, I think part of it is what I just discussed in terms of, do you have the bandwidth to be able to do this? If you are employed by someone else, does your employer give you the flexibility to be gone 2 days a quarter for the committee and the board meetings? And again, if there's a problem, it's going to be a lot more of that. I have a friend who served on the American Express board during the downturn. A lot of comp issues because comp plans didn't take this into account. She had 12 comp meetings in the first quarter, which is an incredible, you don't just go to the meeting, there's an incredible amount of work that has to happen. So you have to have the bandwidth. Also for public company boards, you have to buy in. And we don't often talk about that. I had this same presentation discussion in Salt Lake City with the YPO group there. And after they all left, they were going, well, maybe not so much. Maybe I'm not sure I want to serve on a public company board. But you have to buy in to show that you have skin in the game. The market wants to see that you have skin in the game. And generally, it's a multiplier of the director compensation you receive that year, three to 5 times. Some organizations will allow you to buy in over time using your director fees, and some have a little different thought about that. So you've got those two things. And then Mona's point is exactly right. You have to have a passion for the company, the industry, what they're doing, because you are in this for the long haul. This is years of work that you're going to be doing with this company. And you want to be not just a good director, you want to be an exceptional director. Otherwise, I don't encourage you to go into it.
Okay. Mona, what do people need to know before they get into board work in the public sector?
You have to, we really ask, when we talk to women about serving, we start with what's your passion? How do you want to make your mark? And then you have to figure out, we ask you to do your own Nancy Drew homework, figure out a little bit about the board, but then figure out your time. Some of these boards, they might meet 4 times a year, others 12. And so how much time do you have to travel either to Sacramento or to other parts of the state? But we look at it and you tell us how much time you have, where your interests are, and then we like to go from there.
Okay. So that's a little bit of the nuts and bolts about what we're looking, what Diane and Mona are looking for, and we can talk more about that in the Q&A. I want to get your specific questions. I want to talk a little more broadly about the topic of women and what seems to be kind of a flatlining of women's involvement, certainly in the corporate sector. I think less so in the public sector, in part because of the governor's directive and your hard work in this area. But I know that in the U.S. it's around 16%, right? In Italy and France and Germany, where they have quotas requirements for public companies, the order is much higher, like on the order of 30, 40%. So why is the U.S. such a laggard?
Well, so part of the and it is about 30 or 40%. Those are mandates. So the government requires that they have that. We don't have those mandates here. I don't think you're going to see those go in here. What I do think happens is we do not have a standardized board refreshment process in the U.S. So most public company boards will use age limits. 72, they're moving up as we all age, but 72 is generally the number. And as opposed to a nonprofit board, whereas we all know, because I think we're probably all involved in nonprofits, there's term limits. So there's a natural, orderly refreshment of the board. Here, there's only about, in the Russell 3000, there's only about a 6% turnover a year. And not all those seats are filled. So you end up with about 16% women on the Russell 3000. And I'm curious, how many people think, just to get to gender parity, how many people think that we're going to see that in the U.S. in the next 5 years? Just raise your hand if you think it's going to be 5 years out.
No one's going for it.
Nobody's going for it. How about 10 years out? Anybody think it's going to be in about 10 years? Okay, we got a couple there, thrown in there, thank you. How about 15 years? 15, 20, 25? It's going to be about 40 years at this rate. So I think as individuals, how many people here own a stock of any kind, publicly traded stock? Probably in your 401k or mutual funds. It's really important that there is some activism, if you think this is important, on your part. And that is, if you have publicly traded stock, do you vote your proxy or do you just click for all? Do you write letters to companies where you purchase goods or services and say, I see that you don't have women on your board? If a woman is a CEO, they're going to have women directors and they're going to have more in the executive ranks. But in the Fortune 50, there's only 6% women who are CEOs. So I think there's some activism, and certainly CalPERS and CalSTRS probably globally have had the biggest impact on board diversity. There is
we should specify for those who don't know, it's the California Public Employees pension
yes,
program.
and then the teachers.
And the teachers,
and
California
they are,
teachers.
Yes, they're the two largest pension funds really in the U.S. and in the world. They're very influential. And they started a few years ago something called the Diverse Director Data Source, which is a data source of individuals who are interested in board service. And if anybody would like the link to that, there is no charge to join that. Please just leave me your card and put 3D at the top, and I'll be happy to send you a link to that. If you serve on boards and are looking for well-qualified individuals, I strongly encourage you to take a look at that. This is not, as we were saying a little earlier, on public company boards, this is not a supply problem, it's a demand problem. And the demand has to be created by influential groups like the investors and by you as a consumer.
Well, Mona, let's talk about that. Now, study after study shows that boards that are diverse and balanced for gender and other factors perform better, right? They are more productive, they're more adept at problem solving. If it's a corporate situation, the CEO is paid more highly, right? Often?
Paid more highly than
a non-diverse board.
generally, that's
Generally,
true.
that's true.
That's generally
so, you know, but we always hear about the proverbial pipeline problem. So is there one, or is that just a convenient excuse to keep doing business as usual?
I think for us, it really depends for the state. It depends on whoever's in the office that has the appointing power, right? The governor. It's up to us to push ourselves forward, and it's up to us to organize and put the names of people in front. It's not I think there are so many talented women, men and women, but for today, let's talk about the sisterhood. There are so many, but they don't know the opportunities that are there. I was in Reading a couple weeks ago, 100 women. They sold out the room in 7 days, and they talked about, they had backgrounds of doctors, elected officials, veterinarians, and they didn't even know that they could apply. And so I think it's really up to us to educate each other and to make sure that when there's a new governor or a new person in town, right, or anyone who's in this position, make sure that you have names ready, that you have pre-vetted, that you're ready to put forward people who can either be the appointment secretary, the chief of staff, the deputy chief of staff, the whole 9 yards, and put them, that's your pipeline, because then hopefully everyone else will open the door for others. I mean, I think that there's, I take this position really seriously, and I feel like, I brought my mom today, Connie, and I feel like I owe her a lot, right? Because of the fact that I wouldn't have any of this without her. So governor said, how do you get more women? We work with people like Alice, we work with people like Donna, Karen, and people up and down the state to find California Women Lead, to find organizations and groups that will bring the pipeline together. The women are out there.
Right.
They just don't know that there's, they don't know that this is an opportunity. Many of them say, well, I'm not politically active. That's not what we're looking for. Right. Well, I don't agree with everything the governor says. Well, neither do I, but that's not what we're looking for, right? So we believe in spirited dialogue. We believe in the great mosaic and diversity of thought. And so I think that when you put women in positions where they can move other women forward, then we're winning.
Can I add on to this, Mona, because Mona has nailed this. I think where this comes from is sponsorship. So I serve on California, 3 boards. I serve on a large statewide nonprofit, California Chamber of Commerce, along with Donna, and I was sponsored by a man for that position. I serve on a national nonprofit, AARP Foundation. I didn't see her, but I could hear her voice. Barbara O'Connor sponsored me for that. And I serve on a global private for-profit, and a woman on the East Coast sponsored me for that. So the way people get on any kind of board, and we have to be very active about creating that space in our mind that says, we're going to sponsor women. We're going to sponsor well-qualified women, and they are there. But sponsorship is the key. It's absolutely the key.
Now, what did you mean when you said earlier it's not a supply problem, it's a demand problem?
Right.
So the pipeline is there. We have these incredibly talented and perhaps underutilized skills that many women have.
Right.
And tell us about the demand problem.
So the demand problem comes in a couple of ways. One is there's a mental picture of a director that is the sitting CEO of a public company. And there aren't a lot of women, as I mentioned earlier, in that ranks. I would have to say that being a CEO is a very different job than being a board director. And there aren't a lot of CEOs that can successfully make that transition. So opening the conversation to women with professional experience who map to the corporation's strategy, because that's what we're trying to do with board directors. We want to map their skills to where the corporation's going because they are a strategic asset to the CEO and the organization. And that we look beyond just the C-suite. Of the women who currently serve on public company boards, about a third are C-suite women and a third serve in some capacity in another public company. But being able to open that conversation to different skill sets is something that has been difficult to do. So the boards will look for sitting CEOs as opposed to looking at the larger supply, which is well-qualified, well-educated women who could add an important component to their board mix. And what to Mona's earlier point, you're really looking for cognitive diversity on a board. So in some cases, an older white male adds diversity to a board. Cognitive diversity so that you're vetting the strategy and the conversation in the boardroom, not once it expands from there.
Mona, what have you seen when boards are more diverse? Why do you get better outcomes?
I'll give you an example. We
Yeah.
had a board 6 years ago that the board members stopped talking to each other. Imagine 9 people attending a board meeting in public, not really wanting to engage each other. So when we had a vacancy, one of the things that I realized was that the chair at the time was probably the most, we thought himself to be very smart, maybe the smartest person in the universe. So I knew that what you had to do was find, when we had an appointment, someone who had C-suite experience, someone who has dealt with tough personalities but could kind of calm the room. And we found her. She didn't want the board that I was asking her to be on. She clearly wanted something else. And I said, just try it for a year. But I asked her, go online and watch the meeting. And you'll know exactly why I think you're the perfect person for this position. So that was Friday. Monday, she called and she says, oh, girl, I'm in. I know exactly why you want me on this board. So what happened, though, is that in a group dynamic, right, it took a year to get everyone kind of back to being a functioning board member. And we really helped her. We worked really hard at it. It was tough. And just 2 months ago, she was elected chair. So it took, Anne, 4 years, I think, for that to happen. But I think when you not only just think about just diversity, you have to think about chemistry and the right kind of people to help bring out the best. That's what we look for. And you find that when you find people of, different backgrounds and experience.
And Mona, to your point, I think that there has to be more emphasis on who we choose as the board chair and the committee chairs, because they create the culture. And remember that great Peter Drucker saying that culture eats strategy for breakfast. So I do a lot of training with boards, and when I say what's more important, strategy or culture, all the hands go up that it's the strategy, but it's not. If you don't have the culture of inclusion, if you don't have the culture that different ideas are welcome and that you can vet them out and then you can still all go out for a glass of wine afterwards and it's all fine, then you're going to not have a board that's going to move the strategy forward, but that's going to be welcoming to different individuals and different opinions.
Can I also add that these actions and things happen that change people's lives forever. We were in a group setting, we were at a conference where one of our board appointees stood up and she said, I don't know that anyone has noticed, but I want to say something, that I'm a public member who was just elected chair. And she said, and I'm the first African American in 100 years of this board to serve. And so what happened in that room is that people think about that, but the young folks that were in the room were thinking, wow, maybe I can do that. Maybe I can be the next one. And I think that's really our role, is to open the doors and then, really to watch you pass us. You go for it and pass us. But it means that we have to be in positions of power so that we can open the door and bring others, especially on.
You also, on top of that, the next step of that is, if you're interested in serving on a board, then you have to be willing to do the hard work it takes to get on it. So I have a friend who was in her early 30s, who wanted to serve on the statewide board of her professional association. So it was a nonprofit board. There was about 1,000 members of that board, and she could not get on the slate. So all men on the board, she could not get written into the slate of nominees that went out. So what she did was she sat down and she called every single one of those 1,000 members and asked to be a write-in, and it worked.
Wow.
Nice.
And that's sometimes what has to happen. You have to be somebody who's willing to do that kind of work. I have another friend who's on a technology company. She's a C-level executive, technology company. She wanted to go on a Fortune 500 board. And what she did, it took her 5 years. But she took all the Fortune 500, dropped them into buckets. I love this, not so much about this one. And then went out to her contacts and was very specific about the type of company where she wanted to serve. And she actually ended up with 3 board offers, took one. But again, it's because there aren't a lot of seats, it's hyper competitive for this. And so you've got to be willing to put the work in and give it the time. And I think there's not a lot of us that are willing to do that for different positions. So that's just something to consider.
Now, there's an interesting new study from Politico, which came out about what holds women back from running for office, for public office. And I'm wondering, one of the things they talk about is the confidence gap, which apparently worsens in college, where they found that as men's political ambition grows, women's fades. And it's not because of a lack of qualification, it's because of a belief that they can't do it. And I'm wondering if you see the same thing in your line of work, where you see a woman who is supremely qualified and for some reason can't get off the mark or won't get off the mark. And Mona, why don't you tell us what you see?
I do a lot of these appointment workshops up and down the state. And I generally share early on in my comments that I could line up 5 guys and 5 women, all have about the same qualifications for a job, and this is a vacancy, all 5 guys, I'm your guy. 4 out of the 5 women will say, I'm not sure. I might not be the person you're looking for. I might have to take a class. And so I say that, and then I'll say, first of all, you're all qualified. We've got to figure out what it is that you want to do, but you have to be aware of what you're thinking and saying out loud. So at that same Reading event, I had a woman come up and she said, I'm really interested in serving on a board, but I don't think I'm qualified or I'm good enough. And I said, hold on, back up. We're going to go back in time. I don't want to hear it. You are going to say how fabulous you are and how you're interested and you're eager to learn. And I think we have to do that. It's okay to do it. Right. But if we don't do it, the young ones that are coming after us, they're going to repeat what we're doing. So if we really want to break this, we have to really be aware of, sure, we're all scared. I was petrified to come up to this stage because I either thought I was going to fall or screw up. But guess what? You get over it and you just do it. And so I think that we really have to be better to ourselves. We have to help each other succeed. Yes, we have to be tough with each other when it calls for it, but we have to move each other forward, and we have to have, you can have those conversations. My mom used to say, have those conversations in front of your mirror before you leave for school. And I would say exactly, I won't repeat it, and I didn't really want to go, or someone didn't like me, and then I put forward the face of courage, okay? So I feel like we have to help each other do that. And we have to walk in confident. It's okay to be a little afraid and nervous about it, but we have to walk in with confidence. Because if the first response is, you're coming to me for a job or for an appointment and you say, I don't think I'm the person that you're going to want, why should we appoint you? Why should we hire you then? You know you're qualified. You know you can do it. It's okay to say, because I'm the best person for this job. All right?
Bravo.
So this condition is actually a syndrome, and it's called the imposter syndrome. And women, 70% of women at some point in their life feel this way. So about 10 years ago, I was introducing Madeleine Albright as a speaker to a large group of people. And Madeleine Albright, who, probably gives a talk or two occasionally, was petrified. She was petrified. She had that, and I'm in the green room with her, and I'm absolutely fascinated. She had the deer in the headlights look, and she had the sweaty hands when I shook her hand, and then she went out there and just knocked it out of the park. And I think one of the things, to Mona's point, we need to sponsor each other and give each other confidence that we are able to do this kind of work. I was at a dinner in Aspen, and the lady to my left was the CEO of Oprah Winfrey's Foundation, and the guy on my right was the data manager for Amazon, and I'm thinking, what am I doing here?
You belong there, girl.
But so we all go through this. The best thing we can do to help each other, and this is men and women, is to provide confidence that when we get into these situations, to be verbally, tangibly supported. Not just the emotional support, but again, the sponsorship, tangible support.
Wonderful.
That's right.
Now, I'd like to talk a little bit, especially for our mentees, about how each of you got to your respective positions. And Mona, I want to start with you. You grew up in Kansas.
I grew up in Walnut Grove.
In Walnut Grove, okay. You spent some time in Kansas.
Went to college in Kansas. I was going to be a sister of St. Joseph.
Oh, okay.
Bet you didn't know that.
And no, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
And you took a detour into public service. How did that happen?
I did, because I had a social worker as a father and a mom who would always say, if there's something wrong, fix it. So I became that, on that small Catholic college, the kid that would organize a protest of 20 people, because that's probably all that would join. But it was really one of those, I grew up with parents who always encouraged us to move forward. And every opportunity that I've had is because of a mentor, that they thought of me. They thought, you might be interested in something like this, think about it. Or another mentor, Dale Shimasaki, who called one day and said, I've scheduled an interview for you for a ledge director position, and just try it. And so I'll talk about this job, because this is honestly the best job I've ever had. Nancy McFadden called me one night at 10 o'clock, right after the governor had been sworn in. And when you have the phone, I'm one of those weird people that has the phone next to the bed. And I had just gotten married 2 months prior, and my mentor, Maylee Tom, had said, well, are you going to think about serving in this administration? And I said, no, I just got married. I'm doing my own thing. I'm not doing politics anymore. And she said, well, we've invested a lot in you. And I said,
A little pressure.
right, and I'm Filipino and Catholic, so I was totally doomed. And so I said, well, we'll see. I just got married. I was in the Army 20 years. I already made a promise, and blah, blah, blah. So she calls that night at 10 o'clock. I pick up the phone, and I was asleep, and I said, hi, Mona, this is Mona. And she says, hey, Mona, it's Nance. What are you doing? And chief of staff calls you at 10 o'clock at night for the new governor. You're like, oh. I said, well, I just got married.
Waiting for your call.
Yeah, just got married and, started my new company. And she said, well, have you thought about serving in this administration? And I said, well, it'd be an honor. And then she said, what about appointments? And I had chicken skin, if anyone's from Hawaii, chicken skin, because when Mei Lee had called me that time, she had said, you know, you really ought to think about it. And I said, I'm on Kauai, I'm getting married, I'll call you later. And she said, what would you be interested? And I said, the only thing I'd want to do is appointments. So imagine, you know, 10 o'clock at night getting that call. So she says, come in the next day. And I came in the next day, waited and waited, and then she says, Governor, you remember Mona, and if anyone's met Jerry Brown, we have a lot of work to do. We're behind thousands of things. People need to be. And I was just dumbfounded because I thought, what is going on? And I looked at her, and he walked away, by the way, right after he did that. And I thought, that's weird. And I looked at her, and I said, was that a job offer? And she said, we have a lot to do. and so, you know, I say that story. It's funny, but you know what? Had I not worked with her before, had she not remembered me, I would have never gotten that call. So thinking about each other and thinking about our strengths and bringing others along, I mean, I think that moment was really changed. And I married a 20-year Army vet who, you know, once you make a plan, you're supposed to stick on it. So all I could think of is, oh, crud. And I went home that night and I said to him, hey, Dave, I remember this, I want to tell you a story. And I said, I remember in the 1970s when my uncle and my grandfathers were all around the table and they were talking about, for the first time ever, there was this governor who was appointing more people of color and women to the bench, and there was opportunity, and they were so excited. And he just, because he was a drill sergeant, so his face was like this, which is happy or sad, just like this. And I said, and I just want to have that, I want to see that, I want to be able to bring that enthusiasm and that hope to people and to get, so that they can serve. And he said, well, and I said, well, I would really like to do this job. And he says, well, when you're asked to serve, there's never a question. And I said, good, I said yes.
Nice
But I say that, right, because you also have to have somebody in your corner.
Right.
Because these jobs are not easy. There's pressure, you sacrifice a lot, but when you have a good core, and you have people in your corner, and you have people who will help you when you make a mistake, pick you up, you know, I think you can do it.
Diane, what about your background?
So I'm a first-generation American. Both of my parents served in the Army. My mother outranked my father, which she would occasionally pull rank at home. So that was a lot of fun. And I actually started out after undergrad. I worked for a real estate developer who was a national commercial developer. And then I transitioned into San Francisco and worked for what was called a real estate syndicator, which is people who own large portfolios, and the idea is you're going to bring in investors, make some changes in the portfolio, and then exit. And I loved that job and did it until the tax law changed. And that change in the tax law made it very difficult for these companies to continue at the level at which they were operating, it was consolidated capital. We were the second largest syndicator in the nation, right behind American Express's Valcor. And there were 2 portfolio managers there, and I was one of them. And it was great. They were considered the Google of their time. So a lot of the employee-friendly practices that one hears about so much today. But when that changed, I knew that, like probably a lot of you have gone through or will go through at some point in your career, that road was not going to really be one that I'm going to be able to stay on very long. So I thought about what I like to do work-wise, and probably like a lot of you, was more reactive to an opportunity than proactive about going after that. But it's worked out so well because as the firm has matured, we've really done almost all of our work now relates to working with a board, whether they're hiring somebody at the C level or they're involved in that. So that allowed me to continue really the board work and get more into governance because our family had a very strong value of giving back. I had always been involved in the community and started off right after undergrad with doing work on volunteer boards. So that was my path, not dissimilar to a lot of people on corporate
Yeah.
boards, is that you start on that path and you go forward.
Thank you both so much. We've barely scratched the surface, but I know you all probably have a lot of questions, so why don't we open it up? Michelle has a microphone, and come right on up. And if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself.
Good afternoon, ladies. I'm Leticia Alejandres. I'm the Director of Communications for the California Endowment. And Mona, this is a proud moment. Mona and I grew up together, and I'm so delighted to be sitting next to her mom. And as I hear you speak, I think about the good Pasquil family that you came from, and I know a lot of that came from both of your parents, so congratulations on that.
Thank you.
That's it.
Oh my God, I'm gonna cry.
The question that I have is, because I think you've touched on some of the issues or the questions that I had with regard to the number of women that are on boards, and in addition to that, number of women of color on boards and commissions and so on. My question to you is, what kinds of strategies do you use to tap into new pools of talent? And the reason I ask that is that at the California Endowment, we have a 10-year initiative. I have the good fortune to work there, but also see the number of women who are leaders in their communities and who were very much like Mona, your mom, and my mom, who were out there working in the community, raising families, involved in the church, helping other mothers, those types of things. But I always said this to my mom, Mom, you could be a CEO anywhere. These women are very much that. So how do you expand these pools in the work that both of you do and in the areas in which you work, where you are tapping in to these great young women of color who are eager to serve and have a lot of energy, and they have passion and they have courage?
So I always feel like I turned 55 this year, and I feel like everybody that I've met in 55 years, I feel like I've called them over and over and over again to say, do you know people? Do you know people who would be interested? And you work with different groups, the mosaic, and I have to tell you that most of the time it's not an organized interview; it's a chance meeting. It'll be at a meeting it'll be like a gathering today. And like in Reading, where you'll meet someone. I just met a woman who was from Los Angeles and had never been on a board, but noticed that there were a lot of women who were coming out of domestic violence shelters. And she and her friends knew that they were given clothes, but the women didn't have purses to bring in with them. So she and her friends gathered a bunch of purses and had them donated, and in each of those purses wrote a note of encouragement and inspiration. Yes. I just met that woman at a workshop. She just came up to me. I give everybody my direct line, which Erica, my assistant who's here, probably can't stand that I do. But I give my direct line and I say, call me. And women do. And I'm first gen, I've been here 4 generations, everything, but they do. And I think the more we put ourselves out there to say, we're interested in hearing from you, you get the call back.
So I think on a corporate board, you're probably seeing more and more of these corporate groups whether it's women corporate directors or Latino directors, or there's quite a few of them forming now. I go back to and I would also kind of caution you a little bit on some of these. Some of these are for-profit enterprises. So you have, like anything one joins, you have to understand what you're joining and why you're joining it. Some of them are simply networking opportunities. Some of them are a little more aggressive at sponsoring. But I think those kind of pools are available in the corporate boards. I think the issue is, again, back to the demand. It's getting boards to take a look at that, to be willing to move out of the sitting CEO mentality and look at well-qualified individuals. And that is occurring, but it takes pressure from the investors and it takes pressure from the consumers to make that happen.
All right. Michelle, Ms. Huffner, yes.
Mona, you forgot to tell everybody that you were also, what were you over there with Gavin's job? Lieutenant Governor.
Oh my God.
Lieutenant Governor.
I love it.
But I have a question for you.
Yes.
What about diversity? You know, you're talking about the culture.
Yeah.
the culture, excuse me, white man, is an old white man's world on those paid boards and commissions that you're talking about, the corporate ones. How can a woman of color really fit into that culture without having been there and learned it?
It's a great question, Alice, and I think there's a couple of things to think about. And one is, because there is more pressure coming from investors now, you're seeing that in the public disclosures about the directors, more information about how the board searches for directors and how diversity is considered in those situations. But again, I go back to the board chair needs to lead the charge on this. The other thing that I think happens is when someone comes onto a board, really the CEO and the board chair, more the board chair, makes that person comfortable and integrated. So on public company boards, there's what's called an onboarding process for directors, and it can be quite intense, multiple days. So you understand the company, what's going on, and then culturally that fit has to come from the board chair who makes people feel welcome. So I have a friend who is an activist investor for a wealthy private family. And they had a board where they appointed someone, the public company, to that, or they put somebody on that board. And this was not a welcome situation. And I'm sure Ann Sheen could tell multiple stories about this. But this director said, because of the way the board chair handled it, everybody didn't have their backs up when that person walked in. The board chair was very clear. This is now an equal, one of our directors, we're going to welcome him. And so there's really three pieces to that. One is being sponsored, two is the board chair coming on, and then three is integrating by getting to know your fellow directors. And that generally is not a problem once somebody's on the board. It's the getting on the board that's the issue.
We have a question right over here.
Thank you so much. This has been incredibly helpful. Diane, can you tell me what you mean by sponsorship?
So we have mentors that give us advice in our career, but sponsorships in the corporate setting are more likely to be men because those are the ones that are in the corporate setting. So having a sponsor is someone who is going to say, when we're having our board meeting, I'm going to say, Mona, we really need to consider Edie for this. And the reason we need to consider Edie is X, Y, and Z. But bringing you into the mix, into the slate of people that they're considering, whether it's for a board position or an executive position. And without those sponsors, that's more unlikely to happen. Men are pretty good at asking, to the earlier conversation, gee, if there's ever an opportunity here or there, I'd really like to be considered for this seat. Or for this position. Women, not so much. And so we all need sponsors, men and women, but women need to be aware that they need sponsors. And I don't think it's something that hits us intuitively. But the people who are in the room when the decisions are being made in the corporate world right now are more likely men.
I'm Jane Einhorn, and I run a public relations firm. And I have sort of a two-part question. One is, if you are interested, I was once interested in being on a government board, and someone told me you had to go online, and there was a whole website thing, and it got very confusing to me. So could you tell us how you do that if you're interested in applying? That's my first part. And the second part of my question is, my husband is actually on a board, a statewide board, and he gets paid. So I'm curious, how do you, this is sort of a bad question, but how do you find out which ones pay you? Is there a notation next to it, or how do you figure that out?
So everyone that wants to apply, you have to go online to gov.ca.gov, and in the top right-hand corner it says appointments. Click on the application, and it'll list. You have to fill out. You can walk away, save it, and come back, but you can pick what the boards or positions that you're interested in. There isn't one place where you can find the paid boards because they're not all the same salary. There are not a lot of them. If, the good spirit of Jerry Brown, there's not a lot of them, and there are some, but they're not filled. And so, so there are two kinds of there are two kinds of appointments there, right? So the boards will all get per diem. You get your travel reimbursed, and then there are a few that are full-time jobs for $27,500 a year, and that's the gambling control, not gambling, alcoholic beverage, thank you, I was like looking right at you ladies, alcoholic beverage appeals board, to other boards that are about $147 a year. Some of them meet every month, some of them meet 4 times a year. But I'll give you my phone number, and you can call me and I'll email, and I'll get you the list. It's 445-1915 is my direct line.
All right, that is government service.
Thank you so much for being here. It's great to see you up here. I've paid for your services. And Mona, I love...
Thank you.
And Mona, I adore you. We worked together in the White House, and even though people here didn't benefit maybe from an appointment, we've all benefited from you. You were the #1 advocate for California during the Clinton years, and you have just been phenomenal. So here's my question. Is there any common denominator, one thing that ties all of Jerry Brown's appointments together? Is there one thing that's most important to him that you look for?
Not afraid to ask questions. Not afraid to dive in and make a difficult decision. That's the biggest one. And the other one is spirited dialogue. If you're afraid if he'll call, he has done this randomly. He'll call, let me know when they're on the board for 4 months. I want to know if they think that this board is really necessary. Like, seriously? And he's done it. And so I think that we really look for curiosity in the public service.
Great. That is all we have time for today. We will have time afterwards to chat and ask more questions. I want to thank Diane Miller and Mona Pasquil. I want to thank the hardworking crew at the Dewey Square Group and Lucas Public Affairs who make this look easy. Look for an email soon about our fall program for She Shares, and thank you all very much.
Thanks, Karen.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mona. Good to be up with you.
Thank you so much.
Good to see you.